So my birth went viral, so I'm actually going to put an entire birth story on here. I wasn't going to do this because my birth was actually very traumatic. I will talk about that in this story as well, but here we go. Starting from the very beginning, at 35 weeks exactly, I started having preterm labor. I went into the hospital 3 different times for contractions, 1 to 2 minutes apart. 12, 10, and 8 hours. I was also put on bed rest. So my birth starts on July 4th. I had been having contractions for 3 weeks at that point. On July 4th, I was 37 weeks and 5 days. I started having contractions around 8:20 p.m. And because my hospital is an hour away, I decided to immediately head to the hospital. We got in the car at 9 and dropped our other 2 kids off and got to the hospital exactly at 10. Got into the hospital, they checked me, I was 6 centimeters. I was dilated 5.5 centimeters at my last appointment, which was a week prior. Right before they checked me, I had a really strong contraction and I felt like my water had broken. So when she went in there to check me and I was 6 centimeters, she also said that she didn't fill a bag of water, but she also didn't see pooling of water. I also forgot to mention that my hands were really shaky from my contractions. So I was on the monitor for about an hour. My entire birth plan was to go natural. So after the hour was up, that entire hour they were just like asking me questions, keeping me on the monitor, keeping the baby on the monitor, measuring her heart rate, everything like that. After that hour was up, I was able to get into the bath. This was actually where I wanted to spend most of my labor at, which actually didn't happen. After about 15 to 20 minutes, I got out because I felt like my contractions were slowing down and I wanted to get her into the right position. So I got out, I got on the birthing ball, I started moving on the birthing ball, I started just working through my contractions for the next few hours. At midnight, I looked at the clock and I was like, okay, if I can make it 1 more hour with these contractions, I'm gonna ask to be checked. Also, it was in my birth plan to have minimal checks. So from midnight till 1 a.m., I was having contractions, just working through them. I was on the birthing ball. I was just walking around trying to get the baby in the right position because she was still pretty high up. So at 1 o'clock, I decided to buzz my nurse in and say, I want to be checked. I just want to make sure that, I'm dilating or just, phasing. Absolutely no change. So I then asked the nurse to get me a peanut ball so I could work through my contractions that way and try to get my cervix to dilate. I started crying from the pain. That peanut ball is a bitch. About 25 minutes later, my midwife comes in and she wants to check me herself. So she checks me and she says, yeah, you're about 6 centimeters and you're still about 60% effaced. So we then discuss what we want to do next. I was very discouraged. Being in labor for 3 weeks really takes a toll on you, let's just say that. Go to part 2. This is part 2 of my birth story. This part is going to have some traumatic parts, so just fair warning. So it's now July 5th. My midwife comes in, she asks me what I want to do next. We also discuss breaking my water, and for a very split second, I thought about getting the epidural. I don't know if it was my intuition, or if it was just me being sick of being in labor. But I said, yes, let's break my water and see if that changes things. It was really hard to get my baby down in the right position. So she breaks my water, and oh my God, that was the first time I've ever had my water broken without the epidural. This is my 3rd baby. And that was the coolest feeling, let's be real. I could feel her descending. She breaks my water somewhere around 1:45 a.m. I'm fuzzy on the timeline. But my contractions kicked into overdrive. I started having back-to-back contractions where they would start to go down and then they would go back up. This is kind of where all of my trauma just kind of starts. So after my water breaks, they want to keep the baby on the monitor just to make sure that she is handling losing her water perfectly fine. And after 8 minutes, she decides to check me again, and I am 9 centimeters. So I went from 6 centimeters, water broken, to 9 centimeters. I was still very thick. I think she still said I was 60% effaced. So after being on the monitor for maybe 10 to 15 minutes, I get back in the water. My contractions were so strong. I started very primal growl. And my midwife is like, okay, we got to get you out, because she was afraid that I was going to have the baby in the water. At my hospital, they obviously don't allow birth in the water. So I get out and I am on the edge of the bed and I am just working through my contractions, swaying through my contractions. I am squatting and just trying to get the baby down. This story is hard to tell, so this is kind of where it really gets hard for me. So I start to feel grunty and pushy, and so I get on the bed on my hands and knees. I start pushing and it hurts so bad that I decide to get into a different position. I decide to lay on my side, lay on my back, try and just like make it feel better. Little did I know I wasn't fully dilated. I was about 9.5 centimeters. This was about 2 a.m. So if you're doing the math, that's not very long. Within about 15 minutes of me being 6 centimeters, I am pushing. So I start trying to push the baby out and it hurts so badly. Everything just hurts. At this point, I'm in precipitous labor, which is where you give birth really, really quickly. You go through all of the phases of labor really, really quickly. Your body doesn't have time to slowly get there. The contractions were out of this world painful. Go into part 3. Part 3 of my natural birth. Hopefully this is the last part. After about 20 minutes, my midwife notices that my cervix is actually coming out of me, which means that my cervix wasn't fully dilated. At this point, I start sobbing from being in so much pain. I could not get comfortable. I couldn't find a comfortable position to push in. So now that we realize that I'm still about 9.5 centimeters, I have a cervical lip and that hurts to push against. I get on my side and we try to just get the cervix out of the way. That position hurt so badly. At one point when I'm on my side, I actually start screaming and crying because I am in so much pain. I cannot find a comfortable position. That position just hurts. I then eventually get back on my hands and knees. And at this point, I'm just working through my contractions. My husband was there and he was grounding me. My husband was the best support system I could have ever had there. He was telling me how amazing I was and how that I could do it. And even though I didn't believe him in the moment, it was amazing to hear that. He held me while I cried. After all of this was said and done, he's actually said that he's never seen me in so much pain. He has never seen me like that in our 6 years together. So anyway, I'm working through my contractions on my hands and knees. And at this point, I have my combs in my hands. If you guys don't know, you can have like combs in your hands for like counter pressure. Also, my nurse and my husband were doing counter pressure on my back. That felt amazing. Also, at one point, I was just like sitting down and they were doing counter pressure with my hips. That felt so good. And at this point, it's just trying to get that rest of the cervix out of the way. I'm on my hands and knees at this point, and I ask my midwife if I'm fully dilated. I don't want to push again if I'm not fully dilated. That hurt so bad. But I start to feel a little pushy. It wasn't like a huge sensation of pushiness that a lot of people talk about. I never really had that. My nurse asks if I want to push and I say no because out of fear. I just didn't want to. I was absolutely afraid of pushing again. But I do bear down and start pushing. So at 2:52, I start pushing and the ring of fire. Let me tell you, a lot of people say that that's the worst part with natural birth. I say that that's truly the easiest part, but I had to actually scream it. If you guys haven't seen the video, go watch it. It's pinned on my profile. After 4 minutes of pushing again, my baby comes out. They put her through my legs and I bring her up to my chest, and that was the moment where I could just breathe. A lot of people say you have a natural high after birth, but I didn't have like a natural high. It was just kind of a sigh of relief that it was over until go to part 4. Sorry. So I bring my baby up to my chest. I say, "Hi, baby." And like, I'm just sobbing. She's so beautiful. That feeling when your baby is on your chest for the first time and you're meeting them for the first time is truly the best part. She didn't immediately cry after birth, but everything was looking great. All of her stats were looking great, so they decided to keep her on me. This was actually the first baby that wasn't taken away immediately. They started to get concerned that she wasn't crying, but all of her breathing was looking amazing. After about 10 minutes, my placenta was delivered. I actually had to push it out a little bit. This was the first time I really had to push out a placenta. You think you're done when the baby comes? No, that's not the case. After my placenta is born and they cut the cord and everything, my husband actually does cut the cord. But after my placenta was born, they were checking everything out and I could have swore that I tore. They were looking and they were like, "Oh, you are perfectly good. You did not tear at all," which was the first birth that I've never torn on. Then about 5 minutes later, they lay my bed back and I start to hemorrhage. This is a big point of trauma for me. I had a split second to realize what was going on. The nurse started kneading my uterus like dough. After going through a precipitous labor and birthing out a child, the last thing you want is someone touching your uterus. I start crying and sobbing and screaming. At one point, my nurse says to my doctor, "I cannot get this." My uterus was not firming up, and I was still hemorrhaging. At this point, I start praying to God for it to stop, and it did eventually. Every 15 minutes after the birth, they had to come in and knead my uterus like dough again. With precipitous labor, postpartum hemorrhage is actually really, really common, but I had no idea. After that was all said and done, everything was done. Everyone left the room, and we were left to sit in the golden hour. And let me tell you, that felt amazing. Getting to know my baby and starting breastfeeding and everything like that, it felt so good, even though I had gone through all of that trauma. After about an hour, we have the nurses come back in and we do footprints and we get her in a diaper and everything like that. We have her weighed. She is 6 pounds, 6 ounces and 17.5 inches long. She was our tiniest baby. A few hours later, I am in the bath. I have to actually sit down in the bath to take a shower because of my hemorrhage. Let me tell you, after birth, showers, nothing can ever compare. There will never be a single shower that will feel so good. A few hours later, we get into our postpartum suite where we spend the next 24 hours until we leave. Okay, go to part 5 for the rest of it. This is part 5 of my birth story. This will be definitely the last part. So we're getting discharged the very next day on July 6th. And before leaving the hospital, I had actually gotten the news that I was anemic. So after leaving the hospital, I had to go get me some iron supplements. The first week and a half postpartum was the absolute worst. It was my hardest recovery by far. Not like physically downstairs, but like my internal body was not okay. I lost a lot of blood. To this day, I still don't know how much because I don't want to know. All I know is that it was a lot. I hemorrhaged for nearly 2 minutes. At this point, I also had an IV with Pitocin in it. I actually didn't finish my entire bag because of the way that my IV was placed in my hand. They couldn't get it just right, so where it didn't have like bubbles and stuff, so like the monitor kept going off. But anyway, it's time to leave the hospital on July 6th around noon. I also forgot to say our kids did come to the hospital and meet the baby. They didn't know what the baby was either. Obviously it's a sister, she's a girl, and they were so happy. This has truthfully been the easiest transition from 2 to 3. A lot of people scared me about the transition from 2 to 3, but it was truly amazing. But anyway, on about day 4 postpartum, I started having horrendous postpartum contractions. This time around, my postpartum contractions have been hell. But this day in particular, I was sobbing, hunched over in pain, and my husband's like, "Please call your doctor." So I call my doctor and I'm like, "Hey, I think something is going on. Should I be concerned?" And they said, "As long as you're not bleeding any more than normal and as long as you're not passing huge clots, you're good." So at that time, I wasn't. The next morning, I had actually woken up and I passed a clot the size of a lemon. Called my doctor again and I was like, "Hey, I just passed a clot the size of a lemon. Just want you to know." And they said, "Okay, as long as that doesn't happen again." And it didn't. But after that, my postpartum contractions had kind of died down. I think truly that there was something left in me from my birth. And that's why my postpartum contractions were horrible. And that's why they kind of died down after I lost that huge clot. I am now almost 3 months postpartum and I'm feeling amazing. I'm still not fully recovered from the trauma though. My birth was very traumatic for me. About 2 hours after birth, I was like, I can't even talk about this without sobbing. I was like, I recognized these signs of the trauma. Birth trauma is very real. And no one understands it until you've actually gone through it. So that is my birth story with my 3rd baby and final baby. She is my last, thank God. My full birth log is on my YT.